The first raindrop hit the ground like a warning shot, followed by another, then dozens more drumming against rooftops and pavement. Thunder rumbled in the distance, growling like an angry beast, as the sky turned an eerie shade of gray inside my house. I sipped on my beer, watching from my porch as the storm rolled in a smirk, tugging at the corner of my lip. I already knew what was about to happen. I had seen the neighborhood's drainage system fail before, and I knew exactly whose house sat at the lowest point of the entire block, Karen's, and she had just towed away the only truck in this neighborhood capable of hauling emergency sandbag. A bolt of lightning flashed across the sky, followed by a deafening crack of thunder. The wind picked up, rattling the street signs and bending the trees. Neighbors rushed outside to secure patio furniture, bringing their cars into garages, preparing for the inevitable. But none of them were in as much trouble as Karen Dorsey. I imagined her inside her pristine, overly decorated home, sipping her overpriced wine, oblivious to the fact that she had just made the dumbest decision of her life. 3 hours ago, my truck had been sitting in my driveway, minding its own damn business. It was old, sure, but it was tough, reliable, and necessary for my work. I was a contractor, and without my truck I couldn't haul materials, couldn't move my tools, couldn't do my job. But Karen didn't care about that. All she cared about was how things look. According to her, my truck was an eyesore in our perfect cookie-cutter neighborhood. It didn't fit her aesthetic vision of white picket fences and polished SUVs. So she called the tow company, had them rip it out of my driveway, and left me stranded. I had confronted her, of course, stormed right up to her. Her door knocked so hard her stupid decorative wreath nearly fell off. When she answered, she had that smug, infuriating smile plastered on her face, the one that made my blood pressure spike. "It's just the rules, Jake," she had said, crossing her arms. "If we let one person break them, then where do we draw the line?" "Oh, I don't know. Karen, maybe draw the line at towing a working man's truck for no damn reason," she had shrugged, completely unfed. "You'll thank me when property values go up." I had stared at her, resisting the overwhelming urge to laugh in disbelief. "You have no idea what you just did." "Oh, I think I do," she had said, her tone so condescending it could have made a grown man snap. "Now if you'll excuse me, I have an HOA meeting to prepare for," and with that, she shut the door in my face now, as I watched the rain come down harder, pooling in the gutters. I leaned back against my porch railing and took another sip of my beer. I didn't have to do anything. Nature was about to handle this all on its own. It started slow. At first, the water crept over the sidewalks, flowing down the slope street, pooling in Karen's perfectly manicured front lawn. The drain at the end of her driveway was already clogged with leaves, and soon the water had nowhere to go. But toward her house, I waited, counting down in my head, and sure enough, just minutes later, the inevitable happened. Karen burst out of her front door, her expression morphing from mild concern to full-blown panic as she realized what was happening. She darted around looking for a solution, her expensive yoga pants getting drenched. As she waded through ankle-deep water, she disappeared inside for a moment, then re-emerged with nothing more than a couple of towels which she desperately tried to press against the base of her garage door. As if that would do anything, I nearly choked on my drink, laughing. Another flash of lightning illuminated the street, and I saw Karen whip out her phone, frantically dialing. She paced in circles, one hand on her hip, her voice rising above the sound of the storm. "I need sandbags." "Yes, right now." "What do you mean you don't deliver in this weather?" She turned, looking around wildly, probably realizing she didn't have any way to get them herself. That's when it hit her. Her head snapped in my direction, eyes locking onto mine. And for the first time ever, I saw something I never expected to see from Karen Dorsey. Desperation. I smiled. She hesitated, like she didn't want to admit what she had to do next. But then another wave of water surged over her front steps, and her pride crumbled in an instant. She soused through the flooded street toward my porch, her designer sneakers completely ruined, rain dripping from her perfectly styled hair. I didn't move. I just watched as she climbed the steps, panting slightly, her hands gripping the railing. "Jake," she said, breathless, "I need your truck." I let the words hang between us, savoring them. "Oh, my truck?" I asked, pretending to think you mean the one you had towed. Karen clenched her jaw, her frustration clear. "Yes, that one, please. My basement is flooding." I took my time, stretching my arms, sighing like I was really contemplating it. "Hate to break it to you, Karen, but I don't have a truck anymore." "Remember," she groaned, running a hand through her wet hair. "Jake, come on. Just another loud crash of thunder shook the house and Karen flinched. Water was now halfway up her driveway, creeping dangerously close to her front door. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to meet my eyes. "I'll make it right," she said, her voice quieter now. "Just please." I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice. "Oh, you're going to make it right. All right. But not just with me." Her brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "I mean, if you want my help, we're going to fix more than just your basement. You're going to apologize publicly for towing my truck. You're going to get rid of those ridiculous HOA rules that target working-class people." And I paused, letting the weight of my next words sink in. "You're going to resign as HOA president." Her eyes widened in shock. "What? No. That's ridiculous." I shrugged. "Then I guess you better start swimming." Lightning flashed again, and in that split second, I saw the exact moment Karen realized she had no choice. Her house was going to be ruined if she didn't get those sandbags, and without my truck, she had no way to get them. Her shoulders sagged in defeat. "Fine," she whispered. I didn't quite hear that. She swallowed hard. "Fine, I'll do it." I grinned. "Good choice." Then I grabbed my keys. This storm was going to be the worst thing to ever happen to Karen Dorsey, and for me, it was just getting started. The drive to get the sandbags was slow and tense. Rain hammered against the windshield, turning the roads into reflective pools. The wipers struggled to keep up, creating an eerie rhythm in the silence between us. Karen sat stiffly in the passenger seat. Her arms crossed so tightly it looked like she was trying to fold herself in half. Her jaw was clenched, and every few seconds she would shift, as if she wanted to say something, but kept swallowing the words. I could feel her burning gaze on the side of my face filled with irritation, resentment, and just the tiniest bit of humiliation. I, on the other hand, was enjoying every second of it. I took my time making sure to hit every pothole in the road just hard enough to make Karen jolt in her seat. I even hummed to myself, tapping my fingers on the steering wheel, acting like this was just another casual drive, and not a rescue mission for the woman who had done everything in her power to make my life miserable. The irony of it all was too perfect. The supply yard where they kept the emergency sandbags was about 15 minutes away. But with the storm worsening, it was closer to 30. The roads were slick. The visibility was awful, and every now and then, I had to slow down to let some poor soul in a sedan fight their way through the rising water. I wondered how long Karen's house had left before the basement was completely underwater. I imagined her furniture floating, her expensive rugs drenched, the walls warping from the moisture. It was poetic, really. As we pulled into the yard, a group of workers in rain gear was already scrambling to load bags onto a waiting truck. Karen didn't waste a second. She practically jumped out before I even put the truck in park and ran toward the nearest worker, waving her arms like a madwoman. The guy barely spared her a glance. Too busy dealing with the half-dozen other people shouting for supplies, I took my time stepping out, stretching, rolling my shoulders as if I had all the time in the world. Karen spun toward me, her eyes flashing. "Hurry up," she snapped. "We don't have time for this." I grinned at her. "Relax. Karen, the flood's not going anywhere." She let out a frustrated noise and turned back to the worker. "I need sandbags, as many as you can load." The guy finally looked up and gestured at the clipboard in his hands. Name and vehicle type. Karen hesitated, then, through gritted teeth, she said, "It's his truck." The worker turned to me. I made a show of rocking back on my heels, acting like I needed to think about it. "Jake Reynolds," I said after a long pause. "F-250? The worker scribbled it down. "All right, we'll load you up in a minute." Karen exhaled, relieved. She turned to me, hands on her hips now. "Was that so hard?" I smirked. "No, but watching you admit you needed me was worth the trip." She groaned, rubbing her temples like I was giving her a migraine. A few minutes later, the workers started piling the heavy sandbags into the bed of my truck. I leaned against the side, watching the rain splash against the bags, letting the moment sink in. This was exactly why I had a truck for situations like this, and Karen, in all her high and mighty wisdom, had taken it away only to find herself in desperate need of it a few hours later. As soon as they finished loading, Karen all but shoved me toward the driver's seat. "Let's go," she snapped. "We're wasting time." I took my time getting in, making sure to adjust my mirrors, check my seatbelt, and crack my knuckles before starting the engine. Karen looked like she was about to have a meltdown. The drive back was worse than before. The roads were nearly impassable, now water swirling in dangerous current, A few cars were already half submerged, their owners having abandoned them. Karen kept shifting in her seat, her nails digging into her thighs. "My house is going to be ruined," she muttered under her breath. I didn't say anything. I just kept driving, letting her stew in her own misery. When we finally pulled onto her street, it was like entering a disaster zone. Water covered half the road, lapping against the sidewalk. Several neighbors were outside trying in vain to push water away from their homes with brooms and makeshift barriers. Karen's house was the worst of them all. Her perfectly trimmed bushes were drowning her. White picket fence was half submerged, and worst of all, the basement windows were completely underwater. She let out a strangled sound somewhere between a gasp and a sob, and threw open the door before I even fully stopped. She splashed her way toward the back of the truck, yanking at the sandbags like sheer willpower alone could lift them. I strolled over, hands in my pockets, watching as she struggled. "You need help?" I asked. Tilting my head, she glared at me but didn't answer. Instead, she doubled down, gritting her teeth trying to lift a bag. She barely got it an inch off the bed before it slipped from her grip and landed back with a thud. I crossed my arms. "That's a 100B bag, Kim. You might want to let the professional handle it." She wiped rain from her face, breathing hard. She looked at me, her lips pressing into a thin line. I could see the war in her eyes. Asking for help meant giving up the last shred of dignity she had left. I waited. Finally, she let out a slow, shaky breath. "Fine," she muttered. I cued a hand around my ear. "What was that?" She closed her eyes like she was gathering every ounce of patience in her soul. "Please help me," she grounded out. I smiled. Now that wasn't so hard, was it? She didn't respond. Just stepped aside as I started unloading the bags one by one. I placed them around her house, directing the water flow away from the most vulnerable spots. She followed me, watching, occasionally helping stack them into place. The storm continued to rage, but with every bag we put down, the flooding slowed just a little. By the time we were finished, Karen looked like a drowned rat. Her expensive clothes were soaked through, her hair was a mess, and for the first time ever, she looked truly exhausted. She turned to me, wiping her face. "Thank you," she mumbled. I blinked. What she huffed. I said, "Thank you." I let a slow grin spread across my face. "Damn, this really must be the worst night of your life." She rolled her eyes but didn't argue. I leaned against my truck, arms crossed now about our deal. She sighed. "You're not going to let me forget it, are you?" I shook my head. "Nope." Her shoulders sagged, but she nodded. "Fine. You'll have my resignation by morning." I smiled in the apology. She groaned but extended her hand. "Jake, I'm sorry for towing your truck." I took her hand and shook it. "Oh, was that so hard?" She shot me a look, but there was something different about it this time. Maybe a little respect, maybe just exhaustion. Either way, I had one. The rain continued to pour, but for the first time all night, I didn't mind one bit. The next morning, the storm had finally passed, leaving behind a neighborhood that looked like it had barely survived a war zone. Puddles covered the streets. Debris was scattered across lawns, and a few unlucky homeowners were already pulling soaked furniture out of their houses. The damage was worse than anyone had expected, and right at the center of it all was Karen's house, which now looked like something out of a disaster relief commercial. Her once pristine white fence was barely standing one side, leaning awkwardly like it had given up on life. The perfectly manicured lawn was now a swamp, patches of grass torn up by the rushing water. But the real disaster was inside. I stood at the edge of her driveway, sipping my morning coffee, watching as she soused around in knee-high rubber boots, directing a group of workers who were hauling out soaked furniture. Her basement had been completely flooded, the water reaching nearly 4 feet before it had finally started to drain. Everything down there was ruined. Expensive rugs, custom-built shelves, a full wine collection that had once been the envy of her book club. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept a minute. She spotted me and let out a long sigh before trudging over, arms crossed. I could tell she was dreading this conversation. She probably hoped that now that the chaos was over, I would just forget about our deal. That wasn't going to happen. "Good morning, Karen," I said, taking another sip of coffee. "How's the cleanup going?" She shot me a look that could have melted steel. "It's a disaster," she muttered. "Everything is ruined. Insurance is giving me hell. Apparently they don't cover poor drainage maintenance." I pretended to look sympathetic. "That's rough." almost like someone should have prepared better for the storm. Her nostrils flared, but she forced herself to stay calm. "I know what you're here for," she said through gritted teeth. I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, and what's that?" She inhaled deeply, then exhaled as if trying to expel all of her remaining pride in one breath. "The HOA meeting is at noon," she said. "I'll make my resignation official there." I grinned. "Now that's what I like to hear." She gave me a tight lip smile that looked more like a grimace. "And the apology?" I asked, enjoying the way she flinched. She turned toward her porch, where a few neighbors were standing around, watching the workers taking another deep breath. She straightened her shoulders, walked up the steps and clapped her hands to get their attention. "I'd like to say something," she announced, her voice only slightly shaky last night. "My house suffered severe flood damage, and I would not have been able to minimize the damage. If it weren't for Jake Reynolds." A few neighbors exchanged surprised glances, Karen admitting she needed someone. "This was historic. I made a mistake." She continued, clearing her throat. "I had his truck towed for a ridiculous reason, and as a result, I nearly lost my home. That was unfair of me, and I take full responsibility. Jake, I'm sorry." All eyes turned to me. I let the moment stretch, savoring the weight of it. Then finally I nodded. "Apology accepted." A few neighbors actually clap. Karen looked like she wanted the earth to swallow her whole by noon. The HOA meeting was packed, word had spread about what happened, and people were eager to see the downfall of the Queen. Karen sat stiffly at the front, barely looking at anyone the moment the meeting started. She wasted no time as of today. "I am resigning as HOA president," she said, her voice flat, effective immediately. There was a pause. Then murmurs of shock followed by whispers of excitement. It was happening. The reign of terror was over. Someone in the back muttered finally, and another actually let it out, a relieved sigh. Karen's eye twitched, but she kept her composure. "I also propose that we revise the HOA's vehicle restrictions." She continued, specifically the rule about pickup trucks being considered an eyesore that should be removed. Another round of murmurs, someone even nodded in agreement. I crossed my arms, watching as the wall she had built for herself came crumbling down the board. Members looked at one another as if trying to decide whether they should say something. Eventually one of them, a guy named Greg, spoke up. "I think we should vote on that." It was the fastest vote in HOA history. The truck rule was abolished, and just like that, all of Karen's hard work of making the neighborhood into her vision of suburban paradise was undone. By the time the meeting ended, Karen looked like a deflated balloon. She lingered near the exit, avoiding eye contact with everyone as I walked past her. She muttered under her breath, "I hope you enjoy your victory." I stopped looking at her. "Oh, I will." She rolled her eyes and walked away. Disappearing into the crowd. Over the next few weeks, things slowly returned to normal, except for Karen, who had become a ghost in the neighborhood. She kept to herself, avoided conversations, and for the first time in years she didn't send out ridiculous violation notices. A month later, a moving truck showed up in front of her house. Word spread fast. Karen was leaving. I happened to be outside washing my truck when she walked down the driveway, watching the movers load up boxes. She spotted me and hesitated, like she was debating whether or not to say something. Finally, she let out a breath and walked over. "Well?" she said, shifting awkwardly. "I'm moving." I wiped my hands on a rag and nodded. "Yeah. I heard we're to a condo downtown," she said, folding her arms. "No, who?" I smirked. "Irony is a funny thing, huh?" She let out a soft, dry laugh. "Yeah, I guess it is." She glanced at my truck, then back at me. "You know, you were right about a lot of things." I raised an eyebrow. "You feeling okay, Karen?" She rolled her eyes. "Don't push it." I chuckled. Well, good luck, I guess." She nodded, hesitated for a second like she wanted to say more, then just gave a small wave before heading back inside. A week later, a new family moved in, a young couple with a baby on the way. But the real kicker, the husband was a contractor, and he had 3 trucks. The first time I saw him pull up in his massive work truck, I actually laughed out loud. It was poetic justice at its finest, as I leaned against my truck, watching him unload tools from the back. I couldn't help but think that karma had worked its magic perfectly. Karen had spent years trying to shape the neighborhood into her personal paradise, and in the end, she had been the one forced out. I climbed into my truck, turning the keys in the ignition, the engine rumbling to life. Karma always has 4-wheel drive. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more. Thank you.